families at 709 East Gray Street in Louisville. The project will serve households at or below 60% area median income and consists of 157 one-bedroom units, 146 two-bedroom units, and 43 bedroom units. The development team members are listed in your packet for your reference. Unless there are any questions, I'll note that staff recommends approval by the board of this final resolution for the issuance of bonds for the Prestonian.
Any members have any questions of David? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Make a motion.
All right, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Gail. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. All right, David.
All right. Agenda item number 5, securitization of the Foundry, also known as McKean Apartments. This project is a tax-exempt bond project located at 5700 Grunge Drive in Louisville. This project already received its bond resolution in July of 2019 in an amount of $18 million. The project consists of 198 units serving incomes ranging from 30%, or I'm sorry, with 30 units at 50% AMI, 30 units at 70% AMI, and the balance of the units at 60% AMI. The project has already received its final IRS Forms 8609 back in August of 2022 and was moved to compliance monitoring status. The construction is complete. However, KHC was notified that the primary lender and bond purchaser for this project has asked that the loan be pooled for securitization with Freddie Mac, or the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation. The original loan documents were not prepared with the securitization in mind. The changes to the bond financing agreement to make this happen require approval by KHC's governing board prior to that execution. KHC's Issuers Council, Prutac Rock, has reviewed the proposed changes and has advised that there is no adverse financial impact to KHC. And though KHC is not required to authorize these changes, staff believes that doing so is an act of good faith to encourage continued participation in Kentucky by our financing partners. The development team for this project is listed in your packet, and unless there are any questions, KHC staff recommends approval by the board of this resolution to allow the securitization of the bonds.
Any members have any questions? George?
No.
Oh, okay. If not, I'll entertain a motion. You make that motion, George. All right. Second? I'll second. Okay, I got a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, David, thank you. We appreciate your hard work. Okay, Gail.
I'm going to be Gail.
Oh, you're going to be Gail?
Don't I look like it?
All right.
The Joint Communication and Planning Programs and Policy Committee met today. We got to change that name or get an acronym for that, because I fumble over that every time. May 25th, 2023 at noon today to review the strategies of the FY23 Q3 corporate achievements and FY24 corporate strategies and adopted the FY24 allocation plan. I'll turn it over to John Davidson, where John is, there he is, to review these achievements and strategies. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Scroll back up. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm John Davidson, and it's good to be with you all. Before I talk about where we are through the third quarter related to our corporate strategies, I will share and remind everyone. The May board meeting typically is the culmination of a lot of work that started at the beginning of the calendar year. When we did a cost revenue analysis, we looked at all of our corporate strategies, which I'm going to talk a little bit about forward facing and report on for the current fiscal strategies. We also look at how we allocate the nearly $1.3 billion of federal, state discretionary assets, as well as how we're going to pay for those with the fiscal 24 budget, which Jim and Tracy are going to talk to you all about today. So all of those are informed documents, and they all go together. So this is the culmination of that, and we typically give an update in May, and then again in August about how we're doing and if we're doing what we say we're doing. So With that being said, the first thing I will remind everyone, our fiscal 23 strategies are very similar to the fiscal 24 strategies with a couple of minor things, difference, and I'll talk a little bit about those. But there are 3 strategies. The first is to provide holistic housing solutions. I'm talking about our fiscal 23 strategies right now. Secondly, to be flexible in responding to financial risk. And lastly, to sustain and advance core competencies. So I'm going to share a little bit about the accomplishments and achievements where we are on these strategies through fiscal 3 before Q3 of fiscal 23 before I share the fiscal 24 strategy. So we have 869 loans per employee. Jim tries to keep that number around 900. So we're close to that number. We have, you'll hear more about this a little later, but almost $360,000 in loan production, and that's a little over 2,089 first mortgages. If you recall, a large percentage of our mortgages have DAPs with those, but 2,089 first mortgages in the third quarter. Nearly $5.77 million in secondary trade gains, which is on a goal of $9 million. We have 4,500 housing choice vouchers for individuals that are walking around and housed through our housing choice voucher programs, families. We've served over 28,000 households since the beginning of the year with our HHERF program. And since March of 2021, we have served over 58,000 citizens of the Commonwealth and about $252 million. You'll hear a little more about that as we go forward as well as I talk about the fiscal 24 strategies. We've served 5,700 households in all of our homeless programs. We have a myriad of homeless programs that Wendy Smith oversees. We've created over 1,600 or preserved 1,600 units through our tax-exempt bond and tax credit programs and multifamily development. Kentucky Housing Corporation's staff minority percentage is 17%, the highest it's been since I've been in this role, and the highest it's been since I've been at this corporation. So 17%, nearly 1 in 5 individuals that work at Kentucky Housing are a minority. Continued disaster recovery, redundancy efforts. We have a new co-location site that we're getting ready to move to, thanks to the IT department. We're actually operating at a location not in Frankfort, Kentucky. So all of these computers and everything, we have multiple locations and co-location sites. We are moving to cloud-based storage applications and always moving forward with our technological advancements. We have several teleworking environments. We have a hybrid work environment where folks can work from anywhere, anytime, and make it as easy and conducive as possible for that to occur. And lastly, our corporate planning and accountability area is responsible for tracking all of the administrative fees that the corporation receives for 20, 30, 35 different grants and programs. And I'm happy to say that recently we were able to get a negotiated indirect cost rate from HUD, which will allow us to draw the maximum amount of administrative fees we can for all of these programs, effectively allowing us to serve more individuals and be as efficient as possible. We've also added demographic data to our quarterly reporting. We now track on a program by program and area by area the population we serve, the types of individuals, the demographic information. So we've been doing that for 3 quarters now, and I had the privilege of sharing that with the Joint Committee a little earlier today in detail. So those are just some highlights before I talk about the fiscal 24 strategies. But wanted to let everyone know that we're humming along, and today's board meeting is going to be started by everything that we're doing is related to these strategies. Then you're going to hear about the allocation plan and the budget, all for the new fiscal year. So with that being said, I'll move to the fiscal 24 strategies. And before I forget, there's no actionable item for the 2 items I'm presenting. This is informational only. So feel free to ask any questions should you have them.
John, can I interrupt?
Yes.
I just want to say thank you to the staff And because, I mean, $252 million, y'all, allocating 58,000 individuals. I mean, that is unbelievable work. And that deserves a special consideration. So I'd like for the board to give the staff a round of applause. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
So on the screen here, you will see the fiscal 24 overarching strategies. And I won't go into detail on these, but I will sort of hit the highlights. There are 3 of them. As we return to a sense of normalcy post-pandemic, and whatever that means, and if we are at a sense of normalcy, I will put that with a caveat. We have really, what you're seeing before you on the screen is a focused effort to address the housing supply and disaster housing efforts, and particularly in number 1. So you will recall that I said provide holistic housing solutions. Well, we really, as an executive team at the corporation, try to put a finer point on all of these strategies to make them more actionable, more targeted, and really a little more tangible. So we're going to operate and align our existing housing programs to address the Commonwealth's most urgent housing needs. How we're going to do that is engage in meaningful conversations, internally and externally, and tailor our programs to address the massive housing shortage and the disaster housing that is needed badly in Western Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky, but also the housing supply issue in Kentucky. Secondly, to the extent possible, we're going to leverage our pandemic programs in service of these efforts and addressing these housing needs. I shared with the Joint Committee, the pandemic programs taught us a lot of things. There's a lot more flexibility. We were able to serve 58,000 individuals with less barriers to have to overcome. So we're continuing to do that and continuing to look through those. We're going to engage in a housing needs assessment to support our programmatic decision making to address the housing supply issue, where and what type and how do we provide very targeted housing opportunities for folks. And then we're going to scrutinize our existing programs and policies to identify opportunities to optimize the impact. So again, to address the housing shortage. I will also say between each of these strategies, if you were to draw a very large band across one, that really focuses on our housing programs under the direction of Wendy Smith. So the second strategy, being flexible to responding to financial risk, is really Jim and Tracy's responsibility to be responsible for responding to financial risk. And how we're going to do that is respond by the evolving challenges in a post-pandemic housing market. A lot of questions at the Joint Committee about the housing market and cost and things of that nature. That is something that is impacting probably all of us. Secondly, we're going to optimize the utilization of our administrative funds for the various grants that we have. We did get an indirect cost rate, and it allows us to absolutely maximize all of the various grants and draw down all the available dollars to support those programs, ultimately serving more individuals. We're going to evaluate opportunities to consolidate, structure, and deploy internal resources to formally manage our missional activities, whether that's HAF targets of opportunity in Eastern or Western Kentucky. We're systematically and strategically looking at how we're doing that, using those dollars. And then lastly, self-explanatory but very important, the prudent stewardship of our financial resources to make sure that we are not only prudent, but also making sure that we are practicing the effective risk management, which later on Kevin Field will talk about the audit plan. So again, all of these go together, and the strategies really are the top level of all of the pieces that you will hear about today. Lastly, this is my area of responsibility, sustaining and advancing core competencies in business services. We are committed and continue to be committed to advancing the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. I shared with you not only internally, looking at workforce in the corporation, but also programmatically. By program, we're committed to doing that and actually have data and information to do that. We're expanding the workforce development efforts to retain, promote, and recruit exceptional levels of talent at all levels. The workforce post-pandemic is a challenge. During the pandemic, a challenge. A lot of things that we still have to think about and learn, but we're committed to doing that. And I shared the last two items. We are investing in our technology to continue to drive innovation and make sure that we can continue to operate business continuity, co-location sites, new firewalls, dashboards, cybersecurity efforts, all of the things that we are doing at the corporation. And lastly, the corporation and the executive team, we look at the data from different areas of the corporation, and we share the data and analytics to make informed decisions, whether that's on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, on a quarterly basis, and ask questions why, and have other areas of the corporation inform other areas and share that data so that we can learn and we can absolutely deliver our programs efficiently. So with that, I will entertain any questions for whether the accomplishments through the third quarter or what we are setting forth to do in fiscal 24 as a corporation. Yes, sir.
First of all, great presentation, very informative and well laid out. Going back to the previous year's discussion, you had mentioned a certain amount of housing vouchers, 58,000, something like that, I think. Is that similar to like Section 8, or a certain percentage of the average income in the area, that type of thing?
So a couple things, and I will I'll defer to Wendy on some specifics, but I mentioned in the presentation 4,500 housing choice vouchers. So that is on the tenant assistance and housing choice voucher side. But we also have project-based vouchers in the neighborhood of 22 to 28,000. I'm not sure, Wendy, what's the...
So 22,000 project-based, it's a contract we have with HUD, we pay rent on those, and then about 4,500 voucher-based units with rent assistance. Stephen, the 58,000 was the pandemic emergency rental assistance program, so that was one-time assistance for back rent and a couple of months of future rent and some utilities in some cases. So that was pandemic assistance through Treasury.
Thank you for the question. Any other? With your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll turn it over to Kendrick Vonderschmidt to talk about the fiscal 24 allocation plan.
John, thank you for all you do. We appreciate your hard work.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. My name is Kendrick Vonderschmidt. I'm the Managing Director of Corporate Planning and Accountability, and I put this allocation plan together for today. I'll direct everyone to the first page of the plan. All right. We'll focus on these first two columns, FY24 and FY23. Beginning at the top, we can look at single-family. What is this document? This document lays out how KHC will allocate its program funds over the coming fiscal year. A lot of these funds, some of them come directly in the corporation, and we have to spend them in a very prescribed way from how HUD tells us we can operate these programs. Some of them we have some choices on, so we'll go through these as we continue the list. Beginning with single-family programs, you'll note that in our mainline mortgage loan program with Ginnie Mae and Fannie Mae, we are allocating $250 million next year, with intending to make 1,475 loans. That is going to be paired with our single-family bond program, the mortgage revenue bond program, which is $150 million. Right below it for 880 loans. You will note that the mortgage credit certificate program, we're not planning on operating that substantially at all next year, and that is trading off with that new single-family bond program, which you'll note is not in FY23. We pair all of these programs with our down payment assistance program in single family. That is funded by a pot of funds called the Homeowner Assistance Fund. And we're planning on using $25 million from that fund, making 2,500 loans out of those. You'll note that between FY23 and FY24, the average loan is going up from $7,500 to $10,000. Then next is our Homeowner Assistance Fund, which we refer to here in the corporation as HOPE. This is a pandemic era program which helps homeowners stay in their homes, which is temporary funding. We look to get $14 million of that program out next year, or 1,000 units. Finally, looking at our counseling programs together, just over $200,000, looking to counsel 2,400 units. Next, looking at our homeownership production program. This is a single-family construction and rehabilitation program within Wendy's Department and HCA. You'll note a large jump between $8.8 million and $22.6 million, and a commensurate increase in the number of units. That delta there, that is $15 million from the Rural Housing Trust Fund, which was awarded by the state to KHC for assistance in both eastern and western Kentucky, specifically the areas surrounding our disaster zones. Additionally, as you will note that we do intend to have a small uptick in the per unit investment there, reflecting the rise in construction prices from $41,000 to $47,000. Looking at multifamily production, you'll notice a substantial increase in investment from $274 million in investment to $487 million in investment. This is largely an uptick in the amount of bonds we anticipate being able to award to projects next year. And we also note the increase in the per unit costs due to construction prices as well. Next is our rental assistance programs, some of the programs we've been talking about already today. A slight uptick from $176 million to $177 million in these HCEs and these project-based units. And a substantial increase from $450 million to $833 million, or $450,000 to $833,000 these are temporary emergency housing vouchers. We do intend to get 1,140 units out next year with these housing vouchers, and we've been more successful recently leasing those units up. I will draw your attention to the COVID-19 eviction relief line. You'll notice a substantial decrease in the amount of funds available for that. That is the Healthy at Home Eviction Relief Program, which is sunsetting and becoming our eviction diversion program. We look to get there's a much narrower program that we're looking to get $12.7 million out through next year. Moving on to our homelessness and special needs programs. There's an increase in funding from 8.4 to 11.3 million. These are mainline programs that are funded through HUD. Our same situation with our HOPWA program, the Persons with AIDS Assisted through with Housing Solutions. The 1.3 million increase to 1.4. And you'll note with both of these two homelessness programs, all this homelessness program, an uptick in the amount of investment per unit. Looking at 24, that is both looking at how this year has gone and how the previous years have gone, and how much we have to put into these units for this post-pandemic housing market. Finally, drawing your attention to emergency solution grants. You'll notice that we're not putting any new awards into this CARES grant that happened at the very beginning of the pandemic. We awarded over $23 million back in fiscal 21, and we will still be supporting those units through September 30th when those funds expire. Finally, looking at our weatherization and energy efficiency grants, a slight uptick from 11.6 to 12.8 million. And I will note once again an increase in the per unit investment due to the labor costs and the amount of funds actually go into a unit to increase the efficiency. Finally, the bipartisan infrastructure legislation is a special pot of the same weatherization grant money that we can use for some additional purposes. For weatherization of programs, we intend to make some special awards next year for some multifamily weatherization projects and for some targeted special case grants with some of our partners that are doing well. The funding we're giving them. You'll note last year we had $25 million to award. Those funds will continue on for the next 5 years or 4 years. And with that, I will note that there are 2 things that are not on here that we are aware of, kind of vaguely for the next coming years. We received a substantial award in response to a special notice of funding opportunity with HUD, but within that COC grant, one of our normal homelessness programs. We just don't know when those funds are coming or really how many units we'll be able to support with them. So those are not on here. They may be reflected in future actuals. And then finally, related to the disaster recovery efforts, we will be working with the LG in the CDBG disaster recovery grant, but we're still in very early days for that. With that, I'm open to any questions about anybody else. Bingo.
You know, I didn't actually look at page 2.
Sure.
But the main thing is that our income will decrease, but that's solely due to the COVID temporary funding that went from whatever 12 million, and next year it'll be 4.8 million in fees and stuff, so that it'll be a $33 million admin and fees, and I expect that's like just normal because that's an expiring program and we don't have another 250 million to hand out.
Yes, and this is very much forecasting what you'll find in the budget, the operating budget when Jim and Tracy, but we have been rolling back programs, specifically that huge NHG growth.
I just want to make sure what I read, what I thought I read is what I read.
You're exactly correct. That big swing there.
Let me ask you, go up to the mortgage credit certificate program, and I asked this of Sam yesterday, that program really didn't end. You had 178 million in there last year, and you had 0 this year. That program really didn't end, right? You just put it in a different category.
We are operating the program currently, that's correct. But we will have very little production in that program next year, this coming fiscal year.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Sure.
we are not allocating 2024 resources to MCCs, but we have carry forward resources that we allocated in that $170 million last year, that there's still $70 million of those resources available for use in 2024.
And also, Kendrick, these figures are a little different than what we received.
Yes, they are. Unfortunately, there's an update on
Just update.
Tuesday.
Okay. All right.
These are the ones up here are correct, and in your
Okay.
slide.
Thank you. Any other members have any questions, Kendrick, on this?
All right. With that, I understand we turn back over to you for a.
Actually, it'd be me. So, Mr. Chairman, I would actually like to entertain first off, thank John and Kendrick for the presentation. It was very excellent, as we pointed out before, very informative. I'm greatly appreciative of that because it's very, very easy to digest the way they put it together. So with that, the Program and Policy Committee recommends the adoption of the FY 2024 allocation plan by the full board.
Any members have any questions of Barry or Gail in regard to this? Yes, Gail.
Just asking you guys, because we didn't really go over page 2, which was the sources of income. Nothing to add beyond what I noticed. That.
No, we'll go into a little bit more detail in the operating budget on the ebbs and flows and where our fees and administrative reimbursements come from.
So are we voting on this, just this page 1 that you showed, or on all of this?
Page 1 actually wraps up the information that is available on page 2 and 3.
Okay, all right, just wanted to know what I'm voting on.
Any other members have any questions? Kendrick, do you have anything you want to add? Well, we appreciate your hard work and your effort, and we appreciate the committee's effort. So, Barry, I guess you've made a motion to...
Well, I'm actually entertaining, so I think we push it back to you.
Okay, Holly makes motion. Gail seconds it. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you all very much for your hard work.
Thank you.
Okay, Stephen, you're up with the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Finance Committee, Kentucky Housing Corporation Board of Directors did meet virtually at 10 a.m. on Thursday, May the 18th. We started off with Kevin Field, internal auditor, led off the meeting with a presentation of fiscal 24 annual internal audit plan. We have Kevin come up and present some highlights of that plan right now.
Thank you, Mr. Brunson. And I'm Kevin Field, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Internal Audit Department here at the corporation. And I am here to present your agenda item number 7, which concerns a recommendation for the approval of the annual internal audit plan for next fiscal year, fiscal year 2024. So the first couple pages of the plan basically provides you with an overview of the internal audit department, our mission, as well as our internal audit approach and our quality assurance approach. So the plan, our standards require, internal audit standards require that we develop this plan on an annual basis based upon risk. And so we have worked with executive management and the members of the Finance Committee and Board to solicit feedback in the development of this plan. So it's basically designed to provide you with a summary regarding the types of audit services which we plan to perform over the next coming fiscal year. A summary of the planned activities is actually, if you go to page 5, starting on page 5 through 7.
That's 43 on my tablet.
Oh, I'm sorry, but page 7 of the plan. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Page number at the bottom first, then in the middle paper.
Right there, we're just scrolling along.
So this is where we begin the summary of the audit activity that is planned for this coming fiscal year. And as you can see, it begins with a lot of external audit work and support, as well as single audit work. We actually have begun some of that work for this current fiscal year for 23. So you'll see some of the services that we, and projects that we review there. Cash disbursements will be coming up next year. And we always perform the reviews of the SOP reports on behalf of the external auditors and provide them that information. So the detail of those activities again cover page 5 through 7. As you can see, they cover compliance reviews, programmatic reviews. We also are required to do an annual review of the MERS, or the Mortgage Electronic Registration System. So that's also included in this year's plan. So while most of the work that we perform, is regulatory in nature or driven by requirements of regulation, we're always open to addressing concerns of the board or senior management in working on other projects. We offer your feedback. But the plan is designed basically to provide the best extent of coverage for the programs and operations of the corporation. So I'd be willing to answer any questions you may have about this plan. Otherwise, we turn it over for your recommendation and approval.
Thank you, Kevin. Anybody have any questions? Well, thanks, Kevin. Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Finance Committee, we'll make a motion to approve Resolution 25, approval of the fiscal year 2024 annual internal audit plan.
Thank you, Stephen. Do we have a second to that motion?
I'll second.
A second, Commissioner Keen. And Kevin, before we vote, thank you so much for your hard work and your effort with this program. I looked at this in detail, and it's amazing what you put together here, so thank you. And I want to also thank the committee for their work, Stephen, and for your leadership. So, if there are no further questions, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, the committee received a presentation from Jim Statler, details of the March 31st, 2023 financial statements. An abbreviated version will be presented here shortly. Financially, the corporation had a good third quarter, which should result in a good performance for the year, though in both cases not robust from previous years. The primary bottom line drivers behind the performance were higher fees from the rental housing production area and single-family servicing revenues being well ahead of the plan. Secondary marketing gains continue to lag prior year's performance, which is reflected in the decrease overall of the income performance. Lower reimbursable expenditures were offset by reduced administrative fee revenue. At this time, I'd like to ask Jim or Tracy, oh, Jim's already there.
Snuck up here right now. Eager.
Man, y'all hard there. Jim, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is on page 51 of your tablet. This is our pro forma statement of net position. Same old pretty much. We are decreasing our assets, decreasing our liabilities by more than we're decreasing our assets, and therefore increasing our net position, which you can see on line K. The decrease in the assets is the paying off of the loans that are in the bond indenture, which are on our books, since we've spent the last pretty much decade replacing those loans with loans in servicing that is off the books. So our balance sheet and the total assets has been decreasing. The liabilities, which are the revenue bonds that finance those loans, they are also being paid down as well. Something that's significant really is more on line L. You've read in the press, heard on the whatever, how marking to market securities has ruined a few banks and impaired a number of others. We've actually marked down our investment portfolio ever to date, if you will, or the status of the portfolio on March 31st of 2023 by $17 million. And we have no intention, as I've said in the past, we have no intention of selling discounted investments. Our intention, of course, is to hold the investments until they mature at par, and we do not have depositors that are taking out our assets to force us to sell them. And so it's a waiting game. The rates come back down, that number goes back to zero. We cannot mark our securities up when they're worth more than we paid for them, but we do have to mark them down when they are worth less than what we paid for them. I think the real significant item on this schedule, and it has been for a long time, is lines N and O, that despite the rhetoric and how tough the housing market is and everything, there's a silver lining in this, and that is people that currently own homes and have mortgages are not selling. That's a problem for the ongoing turnover of housing. But what it does do is it decreases the number of loans that are paying off in our portfolio. So our loans are staying and continuing to earn us money, and we are increasing our portfolio, producing more loans than we're seeing run off. And that's not a phenomenon that we've enjoyed for the last 3 or 4 years. So we do have a 7.4% increase in our outstanding loan service for others. And then equally important with that is we've been able to increase the weighted average net servicing fee by 0.3 basis point, which doesn't sound like a lot, but remember that's on almost $3 billion of loans. And so the servicing fee revenue or annuity stream of this portfolio will generate about $8.3 million of gross revenue going forward in fiscal 24. And so that's our annuity. And it's nice not to see it run off. I've been through 3 or 4 runoff scenarios in my career that it's not fun to have to write off servicing when it presents itself. If you go to tab 52 on your tablets, looking up at the top of it, which is our net interest income and net interest expense, it seems to be disproportionate. We had a very small decrease in our interest income, but a fairly large increase in our interest expense. And that's because we have variable rate bonds on our portfolio, and the variable rate bonds, every 6 weeks or every time the Fed moves their benchmark, our bonds increase in cost as well. It's not the end of the world. We still have a net interest margin of $13.5 million for the 9 months year to date. I'm going to skip line D for just a minute, talk about line F, which is the increase or decrease in fair value of securities and MBSs. Our bottom line this year has suffered a $4 million write-down of that mark-to-market. Last year it was much more significant, as there were more significant drops or increases in interest rates by Fed. But still, it's not cash. That's a paper number, and we'll get that all back when rates start coming back down again. Hopefully within my career, but if not, in Tracy's. So, if you look at the G&A expense on line H, it looks like a tremendous negative movement from $10 million last year to $16 million. Those of us who were around last year remember that we wrote up the amount the pension was going to cost us to get out of. And so it was a negative expense sitting in last year's financial statements, which are the comparatives that we have this year. So we don't have the negative expense this year versus the negative expense last year. It makes the books look worse, but it was because we had an unusual income item or a negative expense item last year. So yes, we're suffering from inflation. Costs are rising, salaries are going up, but it's not as dramatic as maybe as that line on this statement shows. Going back to line D, if I may, Gainesville sale of loans. It's been a great run for the last 8 years. It's really hard now to make money originating and selling loans. It's a perfect market for Tracy to be cutting her teeth on just to see how all the secondary marketing works, because it was easy up till about 1.5 years ago, and it's very difficult to price the loans and get the production. And we'll see that in a couple other areas in the financials, but our loan production is down. There is a housing shortage. People are staying put. People who were first-time home buyers 2 years ago are staying in their homes. They're not moving up because they had to trade out of a 3% loan into a 6% loan, so they're just staying put. So there's no first-time home buyer housing stock that's showing up in the market, and that's what our bread and butter is. And so it's difficult to push those people up because they don't want to give up those cheap loans that they've got to put off moving up, if you will. And there's not a lot of cheaper, not cheap, but cheaper first-time homebuyer stock, either being built or being freed up by people that are already in. That translates into a couple of things. One is less product to sell, so even if you were able to maintain your margin, you'd have a decrease in the gross income from it, and then the spreads are a fraction of what they were 2-3 years ago. And so it's just a very, very difficult market. Our main goal is not to make $1 gajillion, is to get people into housing, but not to lose money doing it either. And so I think we're doing a pretty good job of that. Year to date, we're at $5.7 million again on line D. That's going to be about, we predict, between $2.5 and $3 million better or more for the fourth quarter. So we're looking at maybe a $9 million mark for the year. That compares to last year, I think, was $22 million. And so it's been a very dramatic shift from what's been happening in years past. Still, if you look at line O, last year, again, we had a net income year to date for the three quarters of 27.5. We're at 15 now. We should be about $21 million for the year, which is not an awful year, but not nearly as robust as Steve said, as it was last year. Going to page 53, just a couple of highlights here. In line B, under fiscal 20, where 9 months ended March of 22, there's a huge number there compared to this year. That's where we paid the pension off. And so we wrote a big check in fiscal 22, and that's where it shows up on this chart. And then if you look at the cluster of numbers at the bottom of that, which is cash flows on certain line items, H, I, J, K, and L, all those numbers are smaller this year than last year. All those are the areas where housing production shows up in our financials. And so the overall level of activity has been decreased as well. couple of brief comments on page 54. You've heard from some of the presentations today that HHERF is sunset, and it's sunset ahead of where we thought it was going to sunset. And so if you look at line E, you can see where we're at $3.5 million under budget on revenue coming from that program. And then if you go to line O, you'll see that we're $3.3 million favorable to budget on expenses. Those programs reimburse us for expenses that we incur dollar for dollar. So you don't incur the expense, you don't get the revenue. Those two cancel out on the schedule. Then you go to lines G and H, which is where the net progress in the financials is. And in H, which is rental production, that's multifamily construction and housing creation. They've had a really good year. It's $1.8 million, favorable to budget. That's a very cyclical, even between quarters. And so that actual favorable amount to budget may actually decrease as there's more budget going to be run against it in fourth quarter that we may or may not have enough closings of cash to clear that out. But it's been a very good year, and we will be ahead of budget by quite a bit for the year. The loan servicing number on line G, $936,000 ahead. That is the good side of loan forbearance getting resolved. And if you recall, back in 2020, which is when this whole mess started, there was a fear that this forbearance was going to create huge cash and liquidity problems to large servicers because we were not going to get principal and interest payments. We were not going to get tax and insurance payments, but we were going to have to pay security holders their principal and interest, whether we got it or not. We were going to have to pay taxing authorities, whether we got tax payments from the borrowers. We were going to have to pay insurance premiums, whether we got insurance premiums from the borrowers. And so all of that was pent up in 36 months worth of payments that we didn't get from upwards of 2,500 loans. All of that's flushing through in fiscal 23. And so we're getting 36 months of payments, with 36 months of cash, which is replenishing our cash coffers, and we're also getting 36 months worth of servicing fee income. So we're getting 3 years worth of servicing income in 1 year. We had predicted some of that for the budget, but not to the magnitude that's actually coming through. And when we get to the budget, you'll see that the loan servicing revenue is actually budgeted less for fiscal 24 than 23. 23 was off the charts because of that pent up coming through in 23. And we're going to go back to a little bit more to normalcy in 24. Just real quick on page 55, you can see that we are $2.5 million favorable to budget. Line D on personnel costs, that's salaries, employees, and also contractors. That's the wind up of HHERF. So that translates into the favorable total operating expenses you see on the bottom of this page or near the bottom of the previous schedule when we showed the net income. Other items of note on here, liquidation shortfall. That's an odd number thing that we have to put up with. It has to do with security servicing, because payoffs are down, liquidation shortfall is down. And so that's good because we don't have to pay that shortfall. And if you go up to foreclosure costs and release fees, line G, we're 44% favorable to budget. The foreclosure costs did not unwind as quickly as some of the other COVID unwinding did in the servicing. And so that number is going to be budgeted higher next year because a lot of not only could we not take payments in, but we had a foreclosure moratorium. Those loans are now eligible, if you will, for foreclosure actions, and they'll be coming through in fiscal 24. We had predicted, again, some of that in 23, and I think that number actually is larger this year than last year, but next year I think it'll be just a little bit larger still. This is not an actionable item. This is for informational purposes only. Happy to answer any questions.
Any members have any questions of Jim? Jim, as always, we really appreciate your effort. You don't need this.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
The last item on our agenda from the May 18th meeting was to review and recommend for approval of the Kentucky Housing Corporation's fiscal 24 budget schedule. I have asked Tracy to come up and give us some highlights on that and make a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Brunson. Good afternoon, members of the board. Today we'll be presenting the fiscal 24 operating budget proposal to you all. There are two resolutions that are related to this budget proposal, and I am going to start by highlighting the memo that accommodates the budget. So, Sam, if you could scroll to page 61 right here. Perfect. So I'm going to read some portions of this, and I think really summarizes what this budget proposal entails. Kentucky Housing Corporation enters fiscal 24 in comparatively good financial condition, coming off of what is projected to be a profitable fiscal 23 that Jim has just presented. That said, the corporation continues to deal with what can be described as the most daunting challenge in its history, the coronavirus pandemic. The corporation has effectively administered various stimulus and relief efforts over the past 3 years, providing necessary relief and support to Kentuckians during an unprecedented time. Fiscal 23 has seen the wind down of some of the COVID relief programs, specifically HHERF, as well as some growth and legacy programs that has resulted in additional federal funding appropriations. The corporation's sound financial practices over the last several years have put us on reasonable solid footing to weather a new world environment, having benefited from historically low interest rates, significant refinance and buying activity in the housing mortgage market, as well as exiting the pension program, which significantly reduced our pension expense. Going down to the third paragraph here, this highlights a lot of what Jim just went through with the fiscal 23 Q3 update, but it's really, I think, how it shapes how the budget has been put together. For fiscal 24, revenue sources of corporation's normal activities are budgeted to increase slightly due to increased federal funding appropriations in our homelessness and our weatherization programs. These increases are offset by decreases in income generated by the corporation's homeownership and loan servicing division. Current economic conditions, such as rising interest rates, increased housing costs, housing stock shortages, and global inflationary pressures have impacted the ability for first-time home buyers to achieve home ownership in this environment. Upwardly mobile home buyers in the last several years are staying put in their current houses with their low-rate mortgages, resulting in shortage of entry-level housing stock. Changing market conditions have also impacted the ongoing success of our secondary market program, which is the gains that Jim highlighted. And this source of revenue has been unpredictable over the last year and continues to be subject to market forces. Successful loss mitigation strategies cause many loans exiting code forbearance and becoming current, resulting in 2 or 3 years of loan servicing fees experienced in fiscal 23 that we're no longer going to see in fiscal 24. And rental production activities continue to be strong, although timing of the fees earned can be unpredictable and challenging to project. Revenue sources from COVID-related programs such as HHERF decreased significantly at the end of fiscal 23 and will continue to decrease in fiscal 24. Revenue related to the Housing Assistance Program, HOPE, is expected to increase slightly in 24, but that's only as long as funds remain available for obligations. So the budgeting process requires management estimate and establish the level of activities for the next fiscal year, ensuring that there's sufficient anticipated resources to fund those activities. How we do this is we look at our fiscal 23 projected actuals and use those to forecast and guide the fiscal 24 budget process. So if we go, this podium really needs to be forward. If we go down to the fourth paragraph here, this is something John highlighted before. The one thing that fiscal 24 budget has that's a little bit different is we were successful in acquiring a negotiated indirect cost rate from the Department of Housing and Urban Development this past year, and that has been utilized in the budget process and as part of the budget document. This primarily has a couple benefits to it. First, using NICRA accomplishes 2 outcomes. First, with very high pension costs of the past, now out of the reimbursement cost bill, it's necessary to properly allocate indirect expenses to ensure we recover the maximum admin dollars. We were not able to do that before because the pension costs were so high that we ran for all our grant dollars just on the base expenses and not including indirect. And then secondly, employing the NICRA gives us management an objective, effective tool to measure relative cost benefit of each corporate activity, important for making resource allocation decisions and managing our indirect costs overall. So I'm going to highlight a couple schedules of the fiscal 24 operating budget. Sam, if you can move on to page 66 if you all want to follow on in your services. well. Okay, so this page has both the budget for the HRB and the operating fund. You'll see on lines F and S, the fiscal '24 budget will require a total transfer of funds from the HRB of $2 million. That's a decrease of $1 million in fiscal '23. And down at the bottom of the page, line B, that results in a surplus of $3.02 million for fiscal '24, a decrease of $1.5 million from the projected '23 budgeted surplus. So we feel like that's a good profit margin to have going into fiscal '24. So on the same schedule, the bottom half of it, I can't see if you're that or not, so. Okay. So the budgeted fees and administrative reimbursements for 2024 are estimated to decrease by $5.95 million over projected actual for fiscal '23. And that is the very bottom there. So this consists of a $7.58 million decrease in HHRF admin fees, and that's line M. A $640,000 decrease in homeownership and loan servicing fees, lines L and P. The $800,000 decrease in rental production fees, line O. Offset by an increase of $2.4 million in some of our regular programs, such as home, homelessness, and weatherization on lines I, J, and K. Sam, if you could go to page 70. I'm going to highlight some of our expenses for this budget. Budget expenses for 2024 are estimated to decrease from 2023 projected actuals by approximately $5.4 million, from $41 million to $35.6 million. And that is on line DD. Much of this decrease reflects the wind down of COVID-related programs and their associated overhead costs, along with some growth of our regular programs and inflationary pressures. Our biggest line item is always salary and benefits. So line C there. The 2024 budget for this item totals $23.4 million, a $570,000 decrease over 23 projected actuals. This reflects a $2 million decrease in costs associated with administering HHERF, and then other programs such as home, homelessness programs, and weatherization have increased slightly due to program expansions, and those are reimbursable by, the admin costs are reimbursable. We also saw an increase because we have switched from contract employees to on-payroll employees. So the salary and benefits line has increased as a result of that, and our business services and contracted temp line has gone down as we made that transition. You look at line D, business services. This item reflects a decrease of $5.5 million, comprising mostly of costs associated with sunsetting COVID relief programs, as well as moving those contractor employees onto payroll. Line E, computer operations. This item reflects an increase of $145,000, comprising of costs associated with enhancements to current software, and increase in business software maintenance and system redundancy efforts. Just a couple more to go through. Line H, employee development. This increase of $280,000 when compared to 2023 acknowledges the need to catch up on staff training, which was deferred mostly because of the COVID pandemic. The increase also reflects increases in grant activities and federally funded programs that I've referenced before. Line I, travel, it goes very closely with employee development as there's increases in training associated with growing programs and employee development that's been put off over the last couple of years. Line K, printing and public information. This decrease of $150,000 is mostly due to expenditures from the HHRF program that we will not incur this next fiscal year. Line L, training for clients and partners. Most of this increase, $181,500, reflects costs associated with the new grant activities and federally funded programs, which are covered by administrative reimbursements. And then lastly, Line T, equipment and software. This account group has decreased by $342,000 as a result of several projects completed in '23 that we do not expect to do in 2024. Some of them were COVID related and others were system redundancy efforts that we accomplished. So I'll highlight one more schedule here. Page 73. This is where we apply the negotiated internet cost rate. Go one more. Nope, go back to, sorry. There you go, perfect. This is where we're going to be able to pick up some more overhead costs through a lot of our grant-funded programs by applying this indirect cost rate. This is a good example of where we'll be able to pick up some of those expenses where grants have money available to draw down to cover overhead costs. So this would be very interesting to watch and update on as we go throughout the year. I'm going to make a couple more comments and then we can take questions if you have any. So I'm going back to the memo, Sam, so you can place it wherever you'd like to. The proposed budget incorporates activities we know about and what we estimate will be available resources necessary to achieve our goals. Any reduction in federal funding for affordable housing initiatives will strain our available resources. Current economic conditions, such as rapidly rising interest rates and global inflationary pressures, have impacted our ability to deliver loans to first-time home buyers at the levels we experienced in years past. In order to deliver its mission to help Kentuckians achieve home ownership, the corporation is exploring the option of issuing mortgage revenue bonds in 2024, provide additional funding to augment the secondary market program, and potentially reach unserved or underserved markets. This budget attempts to encompass all the anticipated activities the corporation will be involved in 24 and is based on management's best estimate of the costs necessary to accomplish the varying objectives of those initiatives. I'd like to point out Hendrik Vonderschmidt and his team are vital to putting this operating budget together. Them, along with all of the leadership and managing directors of the corporation, got us to this point. I feel like it's a very sound budget and look forward to reporting on it throughout the next fiscal year. Do you all have any questions?
Any members have any questions of Tracy? I just would like to compliment the staff for this is an enormous task to put this together. And I've been trying to look at it for the last 2 days. Still don't know what So I do have one question though. Liquidation shortfall. I think Jim's tried to explain that to me before, but can you tell me what that is exactly?
Yes, sir. When you service loans being housed in a mortgage-backed security, when an FHA loan pays off, which is 89% or 85% of the loans that we have in Ginnie Mae pools, when an FHA loan pays off on the 5th day of the month, we still owe the security holder 30 days of interest on it. And so the shortfall is the 25 days. FHA used to have in their loan contract that if the borrower didn't give you advance warning that they were going to pay the loan off, you could collect interest to the end of the month. And I'm sure you're familiar with those in your bank, but they changed that in 2013 to where they only have to pay interest through the actual day of payoff. Also complicating that is the fact that a lot of loans pay off in the last week of the month because the borrower is going out and getting a new loan and he doesn't want to prepay interest so much on the new loan. So these loans pay off in the last couple of days of the month. We don't get the payoff until the first couple of days of the next month. Boom, we get to pay another month's interest to the security holders. And so that's a normal cost of servicing MBS style servicing of loans. It's factored into what we pay for servicing or what we're willing to invest in the servicing. But in periods of high payoffs, which we've just come from, those numbers are fairly significant. And this year we actually are under budget because we thought payoffs would continue in fiscal 23 as they had in 21 and 22, and they didn't. So we're favorable to budget. This year we're actually forecasting a significant slowdown in payoffs and a decrease in the liquidation shortfall.
Okay, good, thank you. Any other members have any questions of Tracy or Jim in regard to this? So Stephen, do you have any comments you want to make?
I have none, other than great job, Tracy. I think that this is an example of what we're going to have going forward. You're going to do fine filling those big shoes of Jim.
Appreciate it. They're pretty big too.
So,
Okay, so we've got, basically we have two resolutions here, so we're going to break them up, because that's how they're instructed to do it. So first off, on behalf of the Finance Committee, I make a motion to approve Resolution 26, which is the adoption of the annual budget for the Housing Revenue Bond resolution from July 1, 23 through June 30 of 24.
all right, so we do have a motion for Resolution 26. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Have a second? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Please read.
And also on behalf of the Finance Committee, I make a motion to approve Resolution 27, which is approval of the budgeted operating expenditures for the Housing Revenue Bond Resolution July 1, 23 through June 30, 24.
Okay, so I have a motion on the Resolution 27. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Tracy, thank you very much. Stephen, thank you and your committee for all your hard work. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, so Tracy, we're going to talk about renewing the line of credit with Fifth Third Bank.
Yes, thank you. We have two line of credit renewals I'm going to present to you today. We'll start with Fifth Third Bank. Agenda item number 8, which starts on page 74 in your tablet. To ensure adequate overall liquidity to support the temporary warehousing of single-family loan production, KHC maintains an unsecured $25 million line of credit maturing on June 30, 2023. During fiscal 24, the Fifth Third Bank line of credit will bear interest at 1 month SOFR plus 80 basis points, and will be available with certain limitations for delinquent loan buyout program, and contains a non-usage fee of 20 basis points. Otherwise, the terms and conditions of this line of credit are very similar with PNC, which I'll introduce next. Staff recommends approval by the Board of Directors. Authorizing KHC to renew for 1 year the existing $25 million line of credit with Fifth Third Bank to mature on June 30, 2024.
Okay, so do we have a motion that we renew this line of credit?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, have a motion by Stephen. Have a second.
I just have a question.
All right, go ahead.
Do we have to draw on it at all?
On this particular line, we did not draw on it yet this year. We have two competing lines, and one term that was more favorable, and so we used that one. We may potentially draw on these lines a bit more next year as we get into some mortgage revenue bonds and some other things we're planning to do.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members have any questions? I do have a motion. Need a second?
Second.
I have a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, and Sarah, I need for the minutes to reflect that I do not participate in the discussion and abstain from voting, please. All right, Tracy, PNC Bank.
Thank you. This is agenda item number 9. It starts on page 76 in your tablets. Kentucky Housing Corporation currently maintains a $65 million unsecured line of credit with PNC Bank maturing on June 30th, 2023. KHC currently uses the line of credit to warehouse mortgage purchases that will be sold in the secondary TBA market. The line of credit can also be used to warehouse mortgage purchases in anticipation of obtaining bond proceeds for the permanent financing of mortgages. In addition, the line is available for the buyout of seriously defaulted FHA, VA, and rural housing loans from GD Securities, and the buyout from the bond indenture of FHA, VA, rural housing loans on which foreclosure has been completed but claim process has not yet been received. The line will bear interest at 1 month BSBY plus 40 basis points and contain a non-usage fee of 12.5 basis points. Other terms and conditions are very similar to the Fifth Bank line of credit. This facility, coupled with the $25 million at Fifth Third, provides a total borrowing capacity of $90 million. which management considers adequate to properly fund loan originations and Ginnie security buyout needs. All other terms and conditions for this line would remain the same, and staff recommends approval to renew one-year line of credit for $65 million with PNC Bank to mature June 30, 2024.
Do any members have any questions on this line of credit? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we adopt.
So,
Okay, from Gail, do I have a second? Second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign, motion carries. Thank you, Gracie, so much. Okay, Lee Smith. Authorization to renew the personal service contract.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. This is item 10 on your agenda, page 78 on your PDF packet, if that's helpful. I am here to recommend the renewal, it's the second renewal and final renewal of a contract that we have with the Corporation for Supportive Housing. This is related to some pandemic funds that we got through the American Rescue Plan Act. We got a one-time grant of $52 million through the Home ARP program. We get home funds every year. This was a very unique one-time bucket of funds targeted at creating housing for people significantly at risk of or already experiencing homelessness. And what we wanted to do at KHC with a portion of these funds was create what's called permanent supportive housing. It is the most expensive housing to develop and hardest to keep operating sustainably over time, because it's not just about building units and it's not just about getting rent assistance for those units, it's also about providing ongoing services, because the folks who need these kinds of units tend to have one or multiple conditions that make it very hard for them to remain housing stable and to remain housed. They might have mental health issues. They might also have physical disabilities. They may have substance use disorders. There just might be multiple things going on that make it hard for them to remain sustainably housed. We're not saying that every person who experiences homelessness needs this level of intense, services with their housing, but there is a cohort of folks who are homeless or who are at risk who will not remain housed if we don't offer some permanent supportive housing. Every year, our assessment of our inventory of homeless solutions always shows we have a big gap in permanent supportive housing. So we wanted to use these one-time dollars to solve this big gap that we have had for a long time. However, we don't know the first thing about it. As an organization, we have not done hardly any permanent supportive housing. And so in May of, I think it was 21, we did a request for proposals for some technical assistance and some training around permanent supportive housing. And through that, we engaged the Corporation for Supportive Housing. They are a nonprofit trainer and technical assistance entity. They are nationwide. They have done the work they're doing for us in at least 13 other states, could be more by now. And they have done so far with us, they have helped us develop our plan for these home ARP dollars. They have helped us do outreach to stakeholders to get information, and they are now doing their second of what's called the Permanent Supportive Housing Institute, where we get development teams, usually it's 5 teams that meet for 6 months, and it's a developer, a property management company, and a nonprofit service provider. They have to come as a team over 6 months where they get trained on the finances, the services, to make sure they understand each other's roles, the complexities, the long-term considerations, so that they can then work on a project and get it honed and get technical assistance from CSH to bring us or other funders, their pitches, their applications. And I would like to share with you all, and I think it's because we have used Corporation for Supportive Housing, we were the first state to submit our home ARP plan to HUD and get it approved. And while some states still have not submitted their plan to HUD yet, we have already committed funds to a project that's going to be built in Maysville, and we are getting ready to commit our second bucket of funds to additional projects. So I'm very proud of the speed that we've moved at, and that has largely been because we've had the Corporation for Supportive Housing. So with that, I would like to recommend that we renew them for their 3rd year. I will note that the dollar amount is inaccurate. The $256,000 was our original amount, It is, the contract renewal is just $100,000. So we will have to change that in the resolution, but that's the only change.
Any members have any questions for Wendy? Mazel's a good place to build.
Well, it's a good organization, a good team doing it.
Right. And I might tell the board, I had no involvement whatsoever. Totally surprised. So if no one has any questions of Wendy, Wendy, we appreciate your effort and your hard work. I entertain a motion that we adopt this resolution. All right.
So moved for 100,000, right?
Yes, for 100,000.
Second.
All right, second for Kathy. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, Sam, I'm going to grill you for a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. This agenda item is for authorization to enter into a personal service contract with Walter K. Mack PLC for legal services for the corporation's legal department. KHC requests authorization to enter into this personal service contract for fiscal year 24. Following a request for proposals processed in 2023, 3 responses were received by the corporation. Walter K. Mack was selected by KHC to provide as-needed legal services for KHC's in-house legal department for fiscal year 24. KHC has the option to renew the contract for 2 consecutive years following the original proposal solicitation and evaluation process. KHC recommends approval by the Board of Directors of KHC of a resolution authorizing KHC to enter into this contract with Walter G. and Mack for legal services for the in-house legal department in an amount not to exceed $20,000.
That's a tense card, isn't it?
There's no charge for that. Anybody have any questions of Sam regarding this resolution? If not, I'll entertain a motion that we adopt.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion, second by Kathy. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. Sam, move right on.
Thank you. This second agenda item is for authorization to enter into a personal service contract with McBrayer PLLC for legal services. It's the same idea. KHC requests authorization to enter into this contract for legal services for our in-house legal department for fiscal year 2024. They also responded to the same request for proposal process and were one of the 3 responses that we received. And they were selected by KHC staff to provide as-needed legal services for our in-house department. So we recommend approval by the Board of Directors of a resolution authorizing KHC to enter into a personal service contract with McBrayer for an amount not to exceed $100,000. And the reason we use 2 law firms is to make sure that there's no conflict of interest. So if there is a conflict, we want to make sure that we still have the adequate legal representation.
Any members have any questions? Sam, not only going to take a motion that we approve, that you got a motion, a second?
Second.
Okay, a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, like sign. Motion carries.
Thank you.
All right, Sam, thank you very much, and thank you for taking my phone call. The reason was not around. All right, so we're going to move on to the appointment of private citizens members to the Rural Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee. And just let me say, this is a legislative mandate that Kentucky Housing was asked to fulfill. And I just want to compliment Winston and Sam on working on this very diligently and coming up with what I think are certainly really good members for this. And I know how hard they've worked on this, and I really do appreciate their efforts. So, Winston, I'll turn it over to you.
Before I turn it over to Sam, I'm going to just, as a very brief refresher, we talked about last meeting and a little bit earlier today, the legislation which created the Rural Housing Trust Fund that was adopted by the General Assembly this last session and signed into the law by the governor. And that legislation in a companion bill appropriated a total of $20 million to this fund, the Rural Housing Trust Fund, to be used primarily for the assistance of the victims of the people who suffered from the disasters that we've had in eastern Kentucky and western Kentucky. And it's being funded by with $10 million from the Western Kentucky Save Fund and $10 million from the Eastern Kentucky Save Fund. The legislation provided that the Kentucky Housing Corporation would consult with an advisory committee concerning its policies and its criteria that it adopts for the expenditure of these funds. And that committee, that advisory committee, is composed of Commissioner Quarles or his designee, and also serves on this body, and two members of the General Assembly appointed by two members of the Senate appointed by the President of the Senate, and two members of the House as appointed by the Speaker of the House, and I believe those names are reflected in the documents here. It also provided that the Kentucky Housing Corporation Board would nominate 6 citizens who needed to be residents of rural Kentucky. Could be, in other words, urban residents, but 6 residents to serve on this advisory committee. And that's what this proposed resolution is about. And Sam's going to describe basically what we did in a very short time frame to identify qualified citizens that we felt would be capable of serving in this capacity. Sam?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the KHC was asked by the chairman to come up with some names, and we consulted with internal staff, KHC partners, and other stakeholders to solicit applications from private citizens to meet the qualifications of this committee. And regarding the qualification of residing in a rural community, KHC has defined rural to be the same definition as USDA RD's definition. So we ensured that all of the addresses of the folks who we listed here qualify under that definition. So that sums it up.
Yeah. Okay. We're happy to entertain any questions that you have concerning the process. Just to expand a little bit upon what Sam said, as he said, we conferred with staff for names of people that they knew that had knowledge of affordable housing and had knowledge of housing issues. And we conferred also with the chair, who made suggestions of some names. And we did this in a very compressed timetable because the legislation wasn't introduced, wasn't passed until the last days of the legislator session. And so we basically then contacted those individuals, explained what the advisory committee would be doing, and asked them if they'd be willing to serve, and they provided us with, and then if they indicated yes, we requested an application from them so that we could have on the record their address so that we could, in fact, verify that they resided in the area that they were required to reside by statute. And so that's the information that you'll see along with some other demographic information that's contained in the applications, and I think we have a resume, a bio from each of the individuals. So we would hope that, Mr. Chair, that the board would approve the appointment of these 6 as a group.
Okay, thank you, Winston. Anybody have any questions of Winston or Sam in regard to this? And I think Commissioner Quarles is chair. Is he the chair of this? Yes, he's the chair. So, any questions? Okay. So we need a motion to approve Resolution 37, appointing these private citizens members to the Rural Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee. So I need a motion.
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Gail. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Motion carries. All right. Does any board or staff member have anything that they would like to bring up at this time? Talk about? Okay, Winston, I'm going to yield to you then.
Yeah, I'm just going to summarize very briefly a couple of things that are going on that you all have read about and heard about over the last couple of months, but sometimes these things sort of start to run together or drop out of your line of sight altogether. But in the last 30 days or so, actually at the last meeting, we approved an amendment to the qualified allocation plan, which allowed us to go forward with a notice of application availability for the tax credits for the 23-24 period. And if you recall, one of the amendments to that qualified allocation plan that we made was the inclusion of essentially a set-aside of $1.4 million for a multifamily project in East Kentucky. And so that we'll be receiving applications over the next month or two for that. Those funds will not be allocated until January this coming year. They're not available until then, and that will hopefully be the basis of providing additional multifamily housing for the areas of eastern Kentucky that have been hit by the disaster. We also described at the last meeting our efforts to provide additional multifamily housing in western Kentucky. And we mentioned the fact that there would be forthcoming a NOFA for that, and but that is contingent upon the approval of the substantial amendment or major amendment, which HUD has to approve of the DLG action plan for the western Kentucky. And so that should be forthcoming soon, and hopefully we'll be able to get that application or the notice out on the street in that regard. Just as a sort of the total picture, you have to remember that really we've had two major disasters and a lot of minor disasters in Kentucky in the last several years. And we refer to try to keep them straight in our heads to the 21 disaster as one hand, and then the 22 disasters on the other hand. And of course, the 21 disasters involve the tornadoes in West Kentucky and the flooding in Breathitt County in particular in East Kentucky. And then the flooding, and then the disasters, and the 22 disasters refer primarily to the flooding of East Kentucky, 4 primary counties plus another 10 counties around those primary counties. Now, with reference to the West Kentucky, the 21, West Kentucky plus Breathitt, the 21 disasters, the state is going to be the recipient of Community Block Grant DR disaster relief funding from HUD in the total amount of about $124 million, of which 77, at least in the major amendment, has been set aside for housing. And those housing programs are being administered through the action plan through the Department of Local Government. Dennis and his group are responsible for that and executing on that. And that plan is on the street, so to speak, except for the approval of the substantial amendment, which involved the additional, I think the original amount was about $79 million, and there was another $40 million or so that was added on to it to make for the $124 million. So that's ongoing. We'll starting to see things being built as a result of that, hopefully in the not too distant future. Now, with the Eastern Kentucky and the 22 disasters, the flooding in Eastern Kentucky, the published in the Federal Register just on May 18th, finally, was the formal announcement of essentially $298 million in assistance for East Kentucky, and that includes both housing, infrastructure, economic development, and some other areas, mitigation to speak of. And we've been working with DLG and others within the state government, and Kentucky Housing Corporation will be assuming the responsibility as a subrecipient to essentially manage the housing aspect of that. And we don't know what the exact number of dollars that will be yet. That hasn't been determined, and is yet to be determined, but we think hopefully it'll be at least 50% of that, or something in the neighborhood of $150 million. And that will be programs in which we will, Kentucky Housing Corporation, the whole team under Wendy's leadership will be designing the programs and the implementation system that we will be utilizing to distribute those dollars and get houses built, houses repaired in East Kentucky with that funding. So I just wanted to sort of hit the highlights of those items because frankly, they're coming so fast and furious. They're oftentimes, which program are we talking about now? I mean, but there's a lot going on here. So in addition to the multifamily projects that we've got the rural housing trust fund dollars to get out, and we're going to have the disaster relief HUD dollars to get out. And so as the emergency rental housing assistance program goes into to retirement, as it essentially has, except for the eviction diversion program, which is still ongoing. We've got these two additional programs coming on the heels of those programs. So things continue to be busy. That's my comments.
Thank you, Winston. We appreciate your hard work, and I just want to say it's going to be a real challenge for KHC, but there'll be real opportunities, and I can tell you this staff is up to the task. And Secretary Johnson, Secretary King, we certainly appreciate your all's cooperation working with Kentucky Housing Corporation to get these dollars out, because I've had a lot of family and friends affected by both disasters. So this is a very important process. And we appreciate Winston, the staff's work on this. So, any other members have any questions that they'd like to bring up, or issues like to raise at this point? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. We have a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor? He did it. Ready. Fire up the Jackie on his way. That's the most important motion of the day. Right. Good.